Hello, and welcome to this edition of Exclusive Interview, coming to you from the studios of 84 TV Radio Abuja, Nigeria. My name is Stanley Bentu. Now, for many years, if you wanted to be a part of the Mass Communication Society, there was only one course that you could study in the university, and that was Mass Communication. Well, not anymore. Recently, the federal government, through the National Universities Commission, has approved that mass communication be broken down into 7 different degree courses. How significant will this be? And in what ways would it change communication in Nigeria? Well, that's what I would like to find out. But first, let's take a look at this.
As part of the repositioning and revitalization of university education in Nigeria, the National Universities Commission has unbundled mass communication as a degree program into several separate degree programs, thereby making mass communication to be a full faculty. The unbundling of the programs, which is among the recent major reforms by the Commission, is to meet current demands in university education in line with global development and best practices. According to the Executive Secretary of the Commission, Professor Abubakar Rashid, some of the new programs and departments to be domiciled under the Faculty, School, College of Communication and Media Studies would include, but not limited to, the following: Journalism and Media Studies, Public Relations, Advertising, Broadcasting, Film and Multimedia Studies, Development, Communication Studies, Information and Media Studies. Today on the show, Exclusive Interview speaks to Professor ABIODUN, the head of Mass Communication Department at Bayes University, Abuja, to understand the implication of this bold move.
And I'm now joined by the head of Mass Communication Department, Bayes University, ABIODUN. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure, thanks.
All right, well, let's begin with this landmark piece of information that we got recently, that mass communication is about to be unbundled. It's going to be broken up into, well, at least 7 different degree programs. Yeah. How significant is this?
Well, I think it's been a long, drawn struggle. Started about 2 years ago, led by the erudite Professor Umar Pate of Bayero University as a lead consultant, sort of, with some other erudite professors, Rafa Kenfeyele, Aluma, ABIODUN, and many others like that, believing that it was time that would make the study of mass communication to come in tandem with international best practice, where the entire aspects of communication, the dissemination of information, is not lumped into one single group. Communication technology is evolving. There's so much gain in technologies of communication, and that has caused so many redefinitions, such that we're having new profession coming up, and there's the increasing need for us to capture the details, emerging with the new trends in communications technology. And you cannot capture it, when you have just one omnibus subject matter called mass communication. First, that's not the practice in all standard universities across the world. We have the University of Florida, for instance. You have a complete school of communication. We have colleges of communication across the world. We have the communication institutions across the world. The University of Leeds, where I studied, it's called the Institute of Communication. One huge institution having different compartmentalized aspects of information dissemination. So it was time that we come in tandem with international best practice. And secondly, we need to capture, the emerging details arising from the gains in communications technology. And most importantly as well, we need to make the students, the graduates, market ready. okay, much more specialized, not for them to be jack of all trade and master of none. But with the unbundling, engineered by NUC through the cooperation of faculty, like I told you, to the recommendation of leading communication scholars in the country, NUC acceded to it and believed that it was time we bring about this change so that students, graduates can be much more market ready. Okay, and the question of they graduating and not having a job will no longer arise anymore, or probably to become minimized. And don't forget that subject matters in history have always gone through revolutions in terms of changes, in terms of redefinition, in terms of breaking them down. So it's just about time that mass communication goes through that kind of revolution, that kind of change, especially in our own climate. Considering the fact that it's one of the newest subjects in the social sciences, it has lasted for nearly 100 years now. And of course, because of the frenetic changes in technologies of communication, which began, from the time of the telegraph up to the time of the telephone, the black and white television, the internet, and now we have speed of light communication, real-time instantaneous communication that has brought about globalization, decenteredness, integration. Of course, you need to break down these aspects so that students can have a better mastery of the emerging dimensions in the study of communication.
So everything is becoming more compartmentalized, more specialized, more technical in each field.
Yes.
I remember once upon a time where it was expected that once you had studied journalism or mass communication, that you were expected to fit in any of these slots. But even as media people, we have our strengths, we have our weaknesses.
Society is very dynamic, and you have to respond to the changing faces of society. Otherwise, you'll be left behind. Otherwise, you become very inefficient in terms of productivity and efficiency. It's only in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, that you still see mass communication being studied as a standalone subject. It's no longer the case, because there are different subjects, emerging subjects, even with the gains in communications technology. Of course, you hear people call themselves influencers, people call themselves digital content developers, people call themselves development communication specialists. How do you capture these dimensions?
All of that under one subject.
Under one subject matter. So it becomes practically impossible, and that's why these experts came together. It came over a long period of discussion that lasted for more than 2 years. With Professor Omar Pate as a lead person, the lead expert in these conversation. Of course, with some other erudite professors, and of course, they came to the realization that we have to break this thing down. But of course, there were subcommittee members, chosen to decide the sections that these courses were broken down to. And of course, we made a presentation to NUC about February last year, and of course, NUC they have their own experts. So they went through the process, and of course, they came back earlier this year and said, I think it is actually a well-deserved revolution that we need, a well-deserved reform that we need to do. But of course, they had even given the go-ahead that universities, may no longer admit for mass communication. They can begin to admit for any of the 7 courses that the mass communication has been broken down into. It can be very, very
expensive. Let me just reel them out now. We're talking journalism studies, advertising, public relations, broadcasting, television, and radio. We also have film and multimedia studies, development, communication, information communication technology, which is very new. This is what the internet has done.
That's right.
And I want to talk more about that. But before we do that, here's an interesting thing, and this is perhaps a good example of what happens down the road. It's been common practice for people who govern to have spokespersons. And usually these spokespersons are taken from the media. Very often they're columnists, and they're people who, we've struggled over time to define exactly what a person should be and how a spokesperson, a proper one, should behave. So looking at all these disciplines, which of the courses would you say would make the best spokesperson for a top government official or even a private organization?
That's a very, very, very valid question because, like I said, We're not subdividing the discipline for the fun of it. It's a means, it's not an end in itself, but a means to an end. It's to increase productivity, ramp up efficiency, and ensure that there is a robust governance system anywhere in the world, whether it's public or private sector. You need to have robust journalists and robust graduates who can stand on themselves and be very, very proud of their production as graduates, or the outcome of themselves as graduates. Of course, if you ask me with that, I think I would say it's public relations, because public relations has to do with portrayal. How you portray yourself, and how you help others to portray themselves as well. It has to do with third-party representation, has to do with presentation, has to do with representation as well. How do you represent others? How do you represent yourself? How do you present yourself? That's the essence of public relations. And of course, the way you want to portray yourself is in the positive. So if you want to portray yourself in the positive light, you need to have some basic understanding, of the nuances in terms of courage, in terms of composure, in terms of confidence, in terms of intellection, in terms of ideation. All these aspects are better dealt with under public relations, without necessarily saying that it is cast in stone. There might be other subject matters that might intersperse, but essentially I think public relations will help you do a good job of it, because it's also very encompassing. It involves crisis communication, it involves aspects of development communication, and it involves sometimes propaganda, it involves demagoguery, it involves speech making, image making, impressions management, reputation management. All these are embodied under public relations, and that's what you do essentially if you are invited, as a public, as a spokesman for a government official.
Well, very interesting perspective there. Well, we'll now take a short break, but as soon as we come back, we'll be tackling new media, or as the course that will be introduced very shortly, Information Communication Technology Studies. Exactly what is it, and how does that factor into mass communication? Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been having an interesting time on exclusive interview with ABIODUN ADENIYI, who's the head of department at the Mass Communication Bayes University right here in Abuja. We've been talking about the unbundling of mass communication. And before we took a break, I spoke about, the new media type of communication. Earlier you mentioned you have people who call themselves influencers now. So whichever way you look at it, you cannot ignore social media and the role that it plays in information dissemination. So how important is it that we should have a level of professionalism and training?
Well, yeah, of course, it's very, very important that in whatever we do, we should have some basic understanding and some basic appreciation of not just the details, but also ethical issues, moral issues around practice, so that you will not be riding roughshod on the rights of others. But having said that, we cannot also deny the fact that we're in a new age, where people feel a sense of empowerment as a result of the revolution in communication, where the smartphone has become an instrument of expression, where information has been democratized, and the average individual feels that is much more psychologically emboldened, enlivened, and empowered in this new age. It's a new kind of freedom that we have to come to terms with, and of course the social media has become a weapon for an instrumentality for the realization of these facts of the 21st century. We can't take that away. It's one of the price we have to pay, for the revolution, and there's no revolution or invention that does not have a downside. If you remember all inventions in life, when the motor car came, it came with accident. When the aeroplane came, it came with crashes as well. And of course, when Alfred Nobel invented the dynamite, what happened? The dynamite was supposed to help in construction, but it led to bombings and destruction and all of that. So there's always a downside. What we need to do now is how do we find a balance? And I always made the point that we just have to realize that there are laws, there are rules and regulations guiding all these things. And if we can activate the libel and slander law offline, we can as well activate them online. Because libel is written defamation, and written doesn't matter wherever it happens. I mean, if written defamation, it can be online, it can as well be offline. So if you are libeled online, of course you can resort to the law courts. And if you are slandered online, you can resort to the law courts to seek redress. I understand that there's also the crisis of jurisdiction, such that, you know, what is libel here may not be libelous in another country. Of course, there are also international laws and international cooperation. The problem with humanity, this problem with man, is that sometimes we weigh the options. You know, you think about the process in what you call the elongated process of seeking redress may discourage us. You know, but again, this is like I said, it's a crisis of the time, and we have to find ways of living with it. Apart from seeking redress, the other one is for us to engage in media literacy. Countries are doing it. Developed countries are doing it. They are spending millions of dollars investing in media literacy, you know, to inform people, to educate people on the new normal in terms of media evolution.
And how they consume and process
information. That's right, and how they can discern
space.
from the real from the unreal. Sometimes it may be very difficult as well to discern what is unreal, you know, can be very problematic, but again, further discernment, further education can also help check and double check, so that we will not be banding, will not be parading or parroting falsehood, you know, for truism. So,
and there is the challenge of bias confirmation. So when you see something on social media that agrees with your politics, you want to share it.
That's where the element of propaganda comes in. The information that we believe is the one that reinforces our bias, you know, our perception. The one that does not reinforce your bias, you discard it. You describe it as false. That's humanity. That's the human nature for you. So all these things, you know, are actually very subjective. And there has never been any time in history that we have not dealt with falsehood. Even when the print media evolved too, the Gutenberg Galaxy, you remember, when it came, we talked about falsehood. There were problems with falsehood. Even before the Gutenberg Galaxy, you know, the print revolution, in history, when the philosophers were gathering around the square, you know, there were people who disagreed with the philosophers and who went to the sides, you know, to abuse them, to say that what they were saying were not true, even if they didn't have the facts. So it's a historical thing. It's something that we'll continue to deal with. And the important thing for humanity is to continue to find a balance between managing falsehood, managing the downside of social media, and harnessing the gains of the revolution in social media.
One of the things that interested me a lot, the BSc program on development communication. And it's a challenge for lots of media houses today. Do you go with the sensational headlines, which will sell papers or maybe get a lot of likes and reads, it will trend? Or do you go with some of the developmental stories that are very important? And because Nigeria has such a rough economy, a lot of media houses tend to go with, you know, the glamorous headlines, or the headlines that they know are going to trend, as opposed to, you know, some of the critical things. And the larger effect of that is that it causes a residual ignorance, in the sense that even when people are doing a lot of developmental work, very few people know about it.
Well, Stanley, what I would say to that is that if you look at humanity, studies have also proved that humanity prefers the salacious, the sensational, because that's the nature of man, you know, because they are much more entertaining than the serious stories. And if you look at business, for instance, you see greater prosperity in entertainment than in scholarship around the world, you know, to a very large extent. Some of the wealthiest people in the world, you know, a preponderance of wealth is in the hands of sportsmen, you know, entertainers, comedians, musicians, and all of that. That's how life is. Entertainment can be very interesting. So some of these salacious, sensational stories you're talking about can be very entertaining. So humanity tends to go for them, you know, because it helps you to identify with, you know, a base instinct most of the time, you know, that you are also equal with the high and the mighty, With a celebrity, somebody you ordinarily have a parasocial relationship with, when you see something negative, and that's what sells. So it's the nature of news. We probably may not be able to do anything about that, but it doesn't take away the fact that development communication is still very important. Development communication does not relate only with the serious story or with the stories that concern, that is about development, that is about progress. It also relates to some of the things that you and I do, you know, developing communication strategy for organization. You know, it falls under development communication. And it's also very important that we learn some of the nuances, some of the intricacies of it. First of all, you don't just go and start highlighting ways of publicity and you say it's development or it's communication strategy. First, you do needs assessment. You know, you do some auditing of communication needs and what has been on ground before you begin to come up with projections on how well to market or to promote the entity you're supposed to develop communication strategy on. So all these things takes processes. You know, do we have an understanding of these details?
And how to do it correctly.
How to do it correctly.
Because so some people do it in a wrong way.
That's right.
Even putting out false information.
Absolutely.
As long as it's positive or that.
Yeah.
And that's unethical.
That's fine. So those are the details that we need to also mind, you know, in trying to break down development communication. And if you look at the entire details of these 7 courses, it's so very well, it's all encompassing, going by the suggestions of the committee that worked over on it for more than 2 years.
Okay, well, let's talk about how we can even improve the quality of mass communication in all of these 7 departments that we're going to have. Certainly, a lot of equipment will be required. You know, radio studio, control room, television studios and control room, digital editing suites, newsrooms, advertising and public relations labs. All of these things. They certainly are going to cost a pretty penny. So, can we really afford all of this?
Well, there's so many things that can be very expensive that we need in this country that we cannot afford. But the fact that we cannot afford them does not mean that we should not keep trying. All our infrastructural needs have not been met in this country. Don't forget, there are no good roads. You know, we need hospitals. We need educational facilities. Some of them are very, very expensive, but we keep talking about them. Sometimes we go for loans to fund them. So there's one thing to identify a need, and there's another thing to talk about affordability.
And it's important to have the practical of this.
Yes,
the best way to train a media person is within the studio environment.
I'm just giving a background, you know. But ordinarily, you and I know that mass communication is not a cheap course anywhere in the world. You know, it needs equipment, it needs facilities, and you need environment. You know, because most of the time it's hands-on. You don't want to train quacks. You want to train people who are studio ready, people like who are going to be like you in the future. You know, so you need good training with good facility, good equipment. It can be very, very expensive, and that's why you're saying that universities that cannot start all the 7 courses at once can go gradually. You know, to establish a faculty that will take care of these 7 courses. You can start with 2. You can start with 3. You know, but I think they recommended a minimum of 3. Then you move gradually because it's very expensive. You know, if you want to set up a standard studio, you know what it will cost you. You know, this kind of studio, for instance, you know what it costs. So that's what it is. So
will the TED Fund intervention help here?
Yeah, it will help some institutions, some public institutions, but you can't overstretch TED Fund. TED Fund, you know, has limited funds, and they're already intervening in so many places. In so many areas, and the executive secretary is doing a fantastic job, you know, trying to integrate innovation, research with industry. And of course, so many universities are on them. In fact, so many public institutions are completely dependent on funds from the fund, from TED Fund. And of course,
it would be interesting to see how the helix method works here, because you could actually link. Broadcast organizations are always on the lookout for young talent.
That's right.
So if they can also provide some of that technical support for these young talents in the university, also in partnership with the government and TED Fund, I think we might be able to raise a very qualitative next generation of media people.
Yeah, that's fine. I see TED Fund coming in really because of these triple integration that will probably will need, you know, if we want to make a meaning out of some of the innovations we're talking about. I see them intervening in terms of the purchase of this equipment, but we will have made for more progress than these if not for COVID-19. Yeah, definitely universities were already moving to establishing the faculties, but for COVID-19 that has caused these interruptions.
Which leads me to my last question about e-learning.
Oh yeah, it's been very, very interesting.
I would love to get your comments on
yeah, it's been very interesting, full of challenges. My university was never shut. We were never closed. We've been in semesters. We are almost preparing for examination now. The second semester after the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course it's been a success. Teaching students online, although it has its challenges, we can't deny that. Challenges of infrastructure, power failure, expensive data. Then of course there are also behavioral challenges. Some students might want to be doing something else while they are listening to you, so you have to really get them to come on board, to be serious and concentrate as if they were in a physical class session. So it has its own challenges, but at least it helps us to continue the education process so that there won't be any gap, such that when students return, there will not be a problem with getting reintegrated into the learning process.
Well, Professor, personally, I'm very excited about this unbundling. Can't wait for it to happen. I think it would be a major plus to our noble profession. Thank you very much for taking the time to come here to talk to us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
We'll be right back. Well, as usual, a very enlightening conversation with ABIODUN, the head of Mass Communication Department at Bayes University, Abuja. And he pointed out several things that we need to think about that can build our mass communication society. Changes are constant, and unless we adapt to them, we are bound to wither away and die. So this development is a welcome one, and is one that is certain to increase specialization and technical skills. And the triple helix method is something that would work very well here. The federal government, working together with its intervention agencies, can provide that backing support and make sure that private industries and broadcast houses are linked with our tertiary institutions in order to produce quality graduates that would lead mass communication to a new era. Well, we have the ICT, which is a very recent outlet with new platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Well, we can have more professionals here that can provide credible information at the same level with our traditional media. And once we can do this, we can be sure that people will be more informed, more enlightened, and more entertained in a good, clean, and wholesome way. Well, that's it for exclusive interview today. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.